connected to audio. Can't hear me.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are
Hello.
Can you
you?
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Can
Excellent.
you hear us okay?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for
Awesome.
doing this with me.
It's nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you both as well. The way this process works is fairly simple. I ask only 2 questions. You please tell us your name and share anything with us about yourself that will help us get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
So please tell us your names.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Tracy Brackett, and I've been living in the U.S. for 21 years, approximately. I'm from Canada, and I work as a CPA, attend the Summit Church, and enjoy outdoor activities.
Okay. Thank you.
And my name is Joe Brackett. I'm originally from Iowa. I moved down here to North Carolina about 20 years ago. I work for a company that builds CNC machines for anybody out there that might know what that is. And we've been married for 10 years now. I go to Summit Church too, and also love outdoor activities.
Excellent. Excellent. So how did you find my diversity chats? What made you decide to want to do one of these?
We have a friend that's in our Bible study group. Her name is Tanya Dawson, and she completed a diversity chat with you and highly recommended that we contact you to do one as well.
That's very nice. Tanya's a wonderful woman.
Yes, she
Yes, she
is.
is.
And she's been through a lot, so we are very grateful that she is still here and doing well.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So let me see if I understand. So both of Tracy, you're from Canada, and you're from Oregon. Both of those are cold places, aren't they? Right.
Yes, they
Which is
are.
why we're in North Carolina. Yep.
Exactly.
We love North Carolina.
So why did you come to North Carolina? What brought you to North Carolina? Why here? Because I mean, there are other warm states, as well. Why North Carolina?
For me, I first went to Florida. I was looking just for a change for a couple of years and ended up in Florida, and then was there for 4.5 years before my company moved me here to North Carolina.
And for me, honestly, it was pretty random. I had a friend in Iowa who was a flight instructor, who's a pilot, and he taught other people how to fly, and he wanted to move somewhere that was warmer. So I was about 25 or 26 at the time. And he's like, you ever think about moving somewhere else? I'm like, yeah, maybe. And so we literally got a map out, and we picked the East Coast. We picked Myrtle Beach. We flew there, rented a car, drove up till we found Wilmington, North Carolina, and we decided to move to Wilmington, North Carolina, and then from there I made it here. It's a beautiful place, so we both love it here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's the proximity to the beach, to the mountains. North Carolina is one of those really, really fortunate states to have a little bit of everything.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. Have either of you seen the video of Mr. Floyd?
Yes, unfortunately,
Yeah,
we
we
have.
both.
Yes.
What was your gut reaction? What did you think?
For me, it was shock, disbelief, probably more than anything. I felt like I was watching a movie rather than something in real life. Couldn't sleep that night after I watched it, and just a lot of emotion because we both have some neighbors and some close friends, as well as people we go to church with that we're close with that are African American, and just the pain that they experienced through it as well was something that we carried with us too.
Mm.
And for me, shock and horror, disbelief too, but I think there was a lot of anger. Now looking back, I remember watching the video, and obviously I was angry at the police officer who was kneeling on him, but the other police officer that was stopping people from interfering or helping, I almost found myself more angry at him, which might be weird, but he knew what was happening, and there were people who were trying to help, and he was still stopping them, and I just was very angry. So, and it's, when you hear about this stuff and it happens, but then when you see it and watch it in a video, it makes it very real. So.
I think that for the other officers that were standing around the officer who had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, I have come to learn that they were fairly new. They had only been on the job for a very short period of time. And if you work in any organization where there's a hierarchical role, usually you don't push back against your boss or your supervisor or whatever it is for fear of retaliation, or whether you'll continue to have your job or whatever it is. So I do think, at least for those two, I understand a little bit, because they were just trying to make sure they did what their superior said or should was expecting them to do. So that I understand. But the part that was so perplexing to me is that the officer knew Mr. Floyd. They had worked together, they had some sort of relationship. It's not clear to me what, but they had some sort of relationship. And that he so casually had his hand in his pocket. To me, that was the part that was hardest, until he called for his mother, who had been dead for quite a while. Those two things had been kind of shocking to me to kind of think about. Oh my God, this really does happen.
Yeah, the coldness.
Yeah.
And for me too, like his coldness towards it, but then the fact that the next thing that happens was an ambulance shows up and they just put him on a stretcher. It's almost like it was preconceived. I mean, I don't want to say that, but how do you go from resisting arrest, so you put him on the ground, then you put him in an ambulance because he's dead? It's very perplexing. So.
It really is. With neither of you having much time in North Carolina, and when I mean like being born and raised in the South and growing up in the South, that type of barbarism has been in existence for Black people for a very, very long time. And although we are shocked and hurt and traumatized, but you get to the point where you're so perplexed how this could continue to happen over and over and over again. And, when we had Rodney King, and I don't know if either one of you were here when Rodney King happened in 1992, here's this man who they said he was on PCP, and, they're beating him and beating him and beating him. It's videoed, everybody sees it, and they move it to a predominantly white part of the state, and they're acquitted, And so, you get a lot of pushback about all lives matter. And I think that's a very true statement. All lives do matter. Everybody, everything, every dog, ant, bug, whatever it is, all lives matter. But my analogy to that has always been the house that's on fire, right? You call the police and say there's a house on fire. And instead of the fire department going to the house on fire, they stop at the houses that are not burning and putting water on those houses. And so when we say that Black Lives Matter, it's not to devalue anybody else's life. It's just kind of to see, well, these people have been in a place for a very, very long time. It's not been very good. And, trying to understand what is it that makes what makes race, ethnicities, constructs so powerful in our society. This morning I spoke with a scientist, and it was really, really mind-boggling to hear some of the things he said. He spoke about tribalism, he talked about fear, and well, if you consider it from the white person's perspective, when they came over to America, they were surrounded by indigenous people, right? And so you have that thing of self-preservation, right? So we've got to get on top of this. We've got to get ahead. What's not clear about it is why it has to be so barbaric. Why does it have to be so brutal? Even if you believe that's true, if you believe, I'm afraid, I'm in a new country, I'm in a new world, why do we have to be so violent and hurtful to people who have literally done nothing to us other than simply, especially for the indigenous Native Americans, shown them kindness, helped them navigate this world that they have not lived in, and to have that. So you all have thoughts like that, or do you have experiences from where you're originally from that kind of resonate with what's happening here and what's been happening in America for a long time?
I have. So growing up in Iowa is predominantly white. It's probably, when I was younger, like in high school, I would go as far as say 95% or more was probably white. And then different ethnicities from there. But I remember in high school, in the city I lived in, which was Dubuque, Iowa, I remember the KKK coming to town and trying to, I guess, get recruits or whatever they were doing. But I remember just seeing on the news, there were crosses that were put in African Americans' yards and were burning. And I hate to admit this, but I mean, transparent, but I didn't really do anything about it. I didn't fully understand. I was young. That's not an excuse, but I didn't, I mean, they don't teach you this in school. They might just talk about slavery or something, but they don't really teach you about Black lives, about the history. So I didn't fully understand. I've had Black friends throughout my life, and I've never thought about anything about it. And then I had a stepfather who would make jokes about, well, you shouldn't go to this school because it's a little bit dark there. And he was talking about race, and so looking back, I can see a lot of this, like you talk about tribal mentality, a lot of this is taught, I think. Like instinctively, if somebody looks different than me, I might be nervous or fearful, like that might be a human reaction, but to be violent towards them doesn't resonate with me at all. I don't get a violent reaction towards somebody because they look different. So a lot of this, I think, is taught to people.
Tracy?
I have to say, growing up in Canada, I was really very ignorant to all of this. I didn't really know much about it. I moved to Florida and I worked with a beautiful Black woman, and she told me one day that when she went to the store, she was being watched to make sure she wasn't stealing. And it took me off guard. I said, "That happens to you today?" And she said, "Well, yeah, it does. It happens all the time." And that was my very first insight into something that happens on a very regular basis to African Americans. Very shocking to me.
Yeah. I think, so I'll be 62 this year, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I grew up in a little town in South Carolina, a rural little town in South Carolina, not far from Charleston. And growing up, in a town where N-word was bantered around almost like you could say any other common word. Grown men were called boy, and all these things to kind of deflate one's sense of self and to promote another group's sense of self, has always left me kind of wondering, how did we get here? When, at least in America, when I look back and read what my history books told me, that they were these people who came to America because they were seeking to escape religious persecution. And they come and they find these people, first. And so there's what's done to the indigenous people. And then they decide, that there was these indentured servants who were white too, and so they were, they would run away, so they wouldn't be reliable workers, because they were, it's not obvious. Like, if you saw a white couple that looked like you wouldn't think anything of it, because they're, you don't make the decision, the connection that this is maybe an indentured servant or whatever it is. And so someone comes up with a grand idea, well, let's go get some people from Africa. And what really is hard about that is that you go get them and then you do everything you can from the day they come until this day here to destroy or to ensure that they are not human. And the gentleman I was talking to, the scientist I mentioned to you this morning, he's a Jewish physicist, and he's brilliant, right? And so, he had the experience of, talking about the Holocaust and, being persecuted as Jews. And, you go back to that same thing, like, what kind of human beings are we that we can inflict so much pain and hurt on others? Even if tribalism is correct, even if it is because, we want our own tribe, we prefer to be with people who we are like and we have things in common with, does that justify violence and wealth inequity and everything you can name that can be done to a group of people? Does that justify that? And I have yet to find an answer. Do you have any thoughts about why we are the type of people that we are and we treat each other the way that we do?
That's a big question.
Sure is.
Yeah.
I think that I think your self-preservation was a good point. I also think that just in general, we have a lot of pride, and it's just like when you're on one team versus another team, your team's the winning team. You want your team to be the winning team. And I think, unfortunately, people of different colors can sometimes see each other as different teams, but we're all made in the image of God. We're all on the same worldly team. But I don't think that we often see it that way. I think you even see amongst white people competition in certain areas, certainly nowhere near what we're seeing between race. But I do think it's a I'm better than you kind of thing that people have pride over, and it just is part of human sinfulness.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I would just follow up too with that is referring back to God, like, God, one of our commands is to love our neighbors as ourselves. And one thing, Brian Loritz just joined the Summit Church. He's a pretty popular Black preacher and pastor. And we're very excited that he's going to try to teach us about diversity and racial reconciliation. But one thing he's teaching us is that proximity breeds empathy. And what that means is to understand somebody who's different than you, you have to have a relationship with them. So going back to having, the separate teams, it's like if somebody looks different than you, it's easier to stay on your own team versus crossing over and shaking their hand and saying, well, tell me about who you are. But that's what needs to happen. You need to, because you start realizing that you're really not on different teams. Once you build that relationship, but you have to cross that line to get there.
I think that's a wonderful analogy, but I mean, I think if you explore that analogy and you take it to soccer, hockey, football, basketball, they're different teams, but when the match is over, people don't see each other as rivals anymore. I want to win, of course, who's ever team you pick, we want to win, of course we do, but we don't think, well, not only am I going to win, I'm going to do everything I can to destroy you.
Right.
Which kind of flies in the face of what we think about teams, right? So surely you have lots of different teams. I work in technology, and like as a technologist, we are throughout my institution, there are tons of teams that look all kinds of ways, but we all have one common purpose. We're trying to make sure that our institution can do the work that it needs to do, and that it's safe and secure, and they're able to communicate with each other in a way that technology has made available. But it never crosses my mind to think that my colleague who works in another, say, law school or whatever, that I want to destroy that person simply because they're on a different team than mine. We have all these rankings, especially in higher education, like T15s, or you're in the top 10 or something like that. And there is competition amongst them, absolutely, for students and things like that. So that's absolutely a very, very good point. But it's never at the cost of destruction. It's at the cost of educating and bringing people along so that they can fully participate in what we ever describe as the American dream. So I think it's wonderful that you guys are going down this venture. But I'm going to ask you a question. It's probably going to be a pretty uncomfortable question. Why now does it resonate with you when this has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years?
Yeah, my answer is awareness. I was ignorant for many, many years. I actually wrote a blog recently about this. I've been in America for over 21 years, and it was only until 2 years ago when our church put together a racial reconciliation series that we attended in the evening that my eyes were opened to how serious this was. Before that, I really didn't know. And I had little hints of it here and there, but the severity of it was really, I was ignorant to it. And when I started to see how serious it was, and we attended these sessions together, we both said we need to educate ourselves in this area because we don't know. And we probably say things to our African-American friends or coworkers that hurt them because we just don't even know. For example, we have a neighbor who a couple of days ago said that he wanted to buy a treadmill, and he's African-American. And he said, with everything that's going on, I want to get a treadmill. And I said, oh yeah, it's, it's COVID-19 and it's so hot out. And I wasn't, so even now that I've been educating myself for a couple of years, it didn't occur to me that he meant it might not be safe for him to run inside. And so, obviously I learned that with more conversation, but it's just something that unless you train yourself and educate yourself, you're not able to properly see or think what someone else is experiencing on a daily basis.
Interesting. So let me ask you this question. There are a lot of commercials for people asking you to give money to various charities. And one of those charities we see a lot is animals, right? So an owner or someone who's had a dog that they've mistreated or whatever, and the dog is very severely traumatized and maybe even hurt or damaged. And, I think it's, if I remember correctly, they want you to send them $19 a month to save all these animals. And I think that's great. I'm an animal lover. I'm a tree hugger. That's part of my personality. But I can't imagine why. When I think about just, like you look at these dogs who have been done so bad, trained to a tree and left there for however long without food and water, or, a dog dumped over the side of the road somewhere or hit by a car or something, whatever it is. And that we as humankind could be so unkind to things that are sort like, sure, they're vicious dogs and they're dogs who certainly pose a threat, in the right sort of circumstances, but this is just a dog, and like, really, like everything else, it just wants to be loved. It doesn't care, that it doesn't know it's a Rottweiler versus a German Shepherd versus a Beagle versus a whatever. It's just a dog. And it has certain instincts that come natural to dogs, but that a human being could then mistreat that dog and think that that's okay and not have some kind of thought about that. And so when you think about that in the context of Black people, it's almost the exact same way, like, so here's this person who's alive, who's well, who's a very valuable part of society, is seen almost as expendable. We can get rid of, we can run over and we can beat him, we can do whatever we do and keep about our business. And when you think about that in the context of animals, there are people who, prosecute people who mistreat animals, right? So there are all these groups that care about that. But it doesn't seem to me that there's groups that care about what happens to Black people. We are undereducated, we're underpaid. We are a minority in every sense of the word, so I don't know what either one of you do for a living other than what you described, but like where I am, a part of our job is to educate, right? And so we bring students into our space and, we try to do everything we can to help them. But there's a part of us that doesn't understand what it's like to be that Black or brown student coming into an institution where the support structures are not necessarily visible or obtainable, if that makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about that, do you have an analogy that kind of helps you think through how this is and why, besides tribalism or self-preservation, would make it so that we can be so cruel to each other?
Well, for me, like, I go back to one, it's something that's taught, but it's also something that isn't taught. And what I mean by that is, like, I would have loved as a student in school, like elementary school in Iowa, to have been taught what Black people had gone through slavery and history in America, and even go as far as to have a Black person come in and share their personal testimony, their personal real life stories. Because I think that's where awareness is one thing, but when you actually talk to a person, especially if it's somebody you care about and you hear their story, it makes it personal. And without that experience, it's I don't want to say it's us versus them, but it's like, well, this is happening to somebody who's out there and it's a bad thing, but it's not affecting me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And without our students, our kids being taught that, being shown it, then they grow up and they get busy with their lives, they get married, they have kids or whatever, and they just kind of go on their way and they stay on and their team or their, and they may not hate somebody who's a different color, but they're also not defending them, which is a different kind of a sin. It's a different guilt. I mean, you have to come to someone's defense who's being hurt and put down. And without that awareness that then leads to emotional reactions and relationships, then I just don't see anything changing. So.
Yeah, and I've had a couple of instances where I've been hurt by someone else and it doesn't feel very good. But when I think about some of the stories my African American friends have told me they've experienced, it makes the couple of things that I've gone through seem like nothing. So I think as white people, as hard as we are trying to understand and put ourselves in someone else's shoes and try to feel or imagine the pain that African Americans have gone through, it's going to take us even more time to watch more movies and read more books and ask more questions than we already have before we're going to really start to feel it at that level. And maybe we never will because we haven't experienced it, but we definitely think that it is worth every person out there being educated in this area to a point where they can at least somewhat fathom what that might feel like.
I told someone not too long ago, just as the two of you, I don't know you. I've never met you. We've never had food or beer or whatever it is together. But the thought of doing something to harm your person is as abhorrent to me as it is if I were to do something to my own family. Mm-hmm. You're a human being. You're here for a reason. God has said, hey, I need you on this earth. That's why you're here. You have something to contribute. And for me to say, well, I don't like them. Let me just kill them. Or let me just do everything I can to make sure they don't succeed. Flies in the face of religion, humanity, and even, our own thoughts about ourselves. You could think about your kids, and I don't know if you all have kids, but if you think about your kids, I have 2 kids. The thought that something would happen to my kids is almost as frightening to me as it is to happen to my person. Now, I've lived 60 plus years, so if I were to wake up and die tomorrow, or have a heart attack or whatever, and I die tomorrow, that's one thing. But for my child to get on the road to drive back and forth to college and be killed because someone didn't have a good day or whatever it is, it's just it's not frightening. It's not terrifying. It's something even much further away than that, and I'm sure Tanya probably explained this to you, as Black mothers and fathers, we pray every time our children leave the house. We're not praying, the prayer of, bless us and have mercy on us, but prayer of safety. Let our children make it where they need to go and back.
Yeah, and back home.
Yeah, right. And, so when I try to think about this, especially when I talk to white people about this, I just try to understand how is it that although, these things aren't explicitly taught in school, we are somehow or another aware that something is wrong with our society. And I don't care where you are in the world, whether you're in India where they have caste systems or whether you're in Canada, wherever you are, these things have little ways of sticking his head up out of the ground and you see it. The problem is, and I think you said this very well, sometimes you just, that's over there, that has nothing to do with me. I got my family, I've got my own things I take. I don't have to worry about that. But I think that flies in the face of what God is. I think it flies in the face of what humanity is. Because, you said, the Bible says we're supposed to love each other. There's a quote in the Bible that says, what greater gift than it is to give your life for another, and for us to think that we could take life for whatever reason we were able to justify taking someone's life. It's just one of those things that, and I'm not religious at all. I am spiritual. I believe in God. I believe in the universe, but I don't believe in organized religion. But even with that, I find myself troubled that we have not been able to answer this question for hundreds of years, and you can, if you want to take Black people off the table for a minute, Japanese and Chinese internment camps, Holocaust, Native Americans. I mean, you keep going on and on and on and on. Horror stories of people, things that happen to people for reasons that really make no sense. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you think about, like, you know, they're all in turmoil about these statues and these monuments and these racist names, things, do you think that's eroding history, or is that, you know, actually racist? Are they symbols of racism and hate?
I've kind of been thinking about this a lot actually lately, and because it's starting to happen more where they're removing, you know, monuments like that and stuff. And at first, my first reaction was, well, that's a historical thing. What's going on? And then as you hear, you know, more stories from our friends, African American friends, we start to realize that that's part of history, but it's also a very negative history for them. And if we're going to live together in peace and harmony, then we should start showing things. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. is a great example. You know, whatever, different examples of things that are a positive reflection of humanity, not a negative, right? And so I'm starting to realize that it's okay to remove some things that are part of history. Still, it still needs to be taught in school, but as far as displaying it out on the street in the park or wherever as a monument, you know, remove it. And just, if you're going to display something that brings hope, that shows hope for humanity, not that reflects something that was horrible and horrendous in history. I guess is the way I would look at it.
Very good point. I think that, you know, in our society, we're also busy with the me part of our lives. You know, my family, my money, my work, my whatever my me is. You know, and when you kind of just dissect specifically American society, but I think this could be said, you know, throughout the entire world. You know, we've had ways of separating people for various reasons, right? So early on, women were the last group to get the right to vote. You know, they were the last ones. And this was not race when women, is all women, you know. And if you look at some of the professions that we have, like in the humanities, you know, they're lower paid because there's something, and it's not clear to me what that is. And I'm hoping I will learn one day why it is that we can pay a woman or a teacher so little money, especially an elementary school teacher, so little money, when if you grow up to be the president, or you grow up to be a great physicist or a doctor or a lawyer, whatever it is, that foundation had to start in elementary school. And yet we don't value teachers in the same way we do professors in post-secondary education, right? So a faculty in a college can make hundreds of thousands of dollars, but a teacher in a public or even private school setting is paid, you know, barely enough to survive, you know. And so all of these things are these perplexing questions about who and what we are and why we believe and why do we do what we do. Why is that? What is the logic in that? Why is it even today? And even as I look at the two of you, both of you are white, if you and your husband did the exact same job, you'd still be paid less, simply because you're a woman. Why? What's the logic of that? You know, I mean, like, if we can do the same job in the same amount of effort, why does it mean that a woman, for every dollar a man makes somewhere between 75 and 89 cents of that dollar? Something about that is just so illogical to me. Mm-hmm. Because it also relates right back to race, right? So, you know, here's another group we're going to marginalize for whatever reason. You know, I mean, I don't think that white women have it as bad as black and brown people do, but I do think women struggle as well with equality and finding, you know, space. You know, you go to a meeting and you're the only person that looks like you. You know, I tell this story a lot. We had a technical conference at my job, and a woman from a very prestigious university had come there to talk to us, and she said, "I'm going to teach you all some things," you know. And so, you know, we were all thinking, you know, what do you know? We're a T15. We're a grade school. You know, we've got all these things. You're not coming from a T15 school. And she says, she says, how many of you have heard the word he-peat? She asked everybody to raise their hand. One person raised their hand. And so we're sitting there waiting, so you've heard the word repeat, right? Somebody says something and you just repeat what they said. So he-peat, right? So as you're sitting there listening to that word, you're thinking to yourself, what? So when she explained it to us, she said, you as a woman can be sitting in a meeting and come up with this idea and say, hey, I think we ought to do this. Here's the logic behind it. Here's the rationale. Here's how we fund it. Here's the cost benefit analysis. Here's all these pieces and parts. And there's just silence. And then her male colleague says the exact same thing, but may change a few words around. Just rephrase it. And all of a sudden it becomes a thing, i.e. he-peat. So it's only a thing when a man has said it, not when a woman who's competent and educated and all that has said it. But because now a man has said it, it becomes, wow, that's a great idea. I think we should write it. We think about this a long time ago. And so when you, in that context, for a white woman in a predominantly white male industry, technology, to have that experience says even more about our society than just race. There's something at our foundation that's broken. It's really broken bad. And for those people who live in the biblical scholar world, you get Adam and Eve, and the story is told that, your wife is a bone that comes from her husband's body, and she is his helpmate. Okay, I can see the logic of that, because you should be partners and helping each other. It's like, I'm sure the two of you, if you need help, he's going to help you. If she needs help, you're going to help her. That's reasonable and rational. But for you to think that she is lesser than you because you're a man, or because you're whatever you are, whatever the construct is, we make some kind of logical argument about why that's rational and reasonable, And it's part of one of the reasons why I stopped going to organized religious spaces, because I could not understand how someone could stand up in a church and preach something as doctrine that had no foundation in what God is. Yes, God believes in justice, and people who do wrong are going to pay for it. But everything that I have ever read about God is he's a just man. He is a just person. He wants good, kind people who do for each other. And specifically in marriage, there's a part in Corinthians where he says, you should love your wife like God loves the church. And that simple statement has so much weight to it. Now, whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. But the very fact that he says you should love your wife as much as God loved the church means that there's no way a woman could make less than $1 if you made $1. It's just not possible. And so when you think about this in terms of the different groups and things that happen, this really requires us to really think and analyze these things and see if we understand why. And so for the two of you who are both white, you have even a further greater challenge, because you have to find out why your wife is not equal to you in society's eyes. Just that. And you're on the same team, right? You're husband and wife, you have common goals, you're doing things together. But how can it be that a society would allow you to be paid X dollars and her to be paid less? And that's a question, really. It really is. What part of our world allows us to see difference so granular that we are able to make these distinctions even between men and women?
I think
Go ahead.
for me, it's part of that is who has the power, makes the decisions and makes kind of the choices. And so it's a big question, but I think a place to start is we need to change who has the power, or we need to spread the power out so it's equal amongst everybody, which goes along with different ethnicities and different and the same pay. If regardless if you're male or female, you're paid the same, and then different ethnicities have the same opportunities, they have the same jobs and in leadership roles especially. And until that happens, I think unfortunately, like, people will just get in their comfort zones and like, well, this is the way it's always been. and these are the way things have always happened, and these people have always made the decisions, and they've always had the power, so we'll just keep doing it this way. And until that system changes, then unfortunately I think we'll keep repeating history. But I feel like, and we've heard a lot of people kind of use this phrase, but we're at a tipping point. And I think America is at a tipping point where it's really becoming aware. Our eyes are really opening to just all the different racial issues and gender issues, and starting to want to do something about it and make changes. And that's what I think needs to happen, because otherwise, you know, if as a white male who's running a company and this is the way it's ran, if the next person that comes along who takes over the company is a white male and it was taught by him, he's going to keep doing it the same way. And until somebody steps in and makes that change, then history just keeps repeating. So.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that there is a superiority complex among us humans. We live, our society is not driven by the Bible. We wish it was, but unfortunately it's not. And we know that God sees all people as equal, man and woman, black, white, yellow, red. But our society doesn't all follow God's way. And they have a superiority complex that they like the status quo and they want to be superior. And I do think that we need that mindset change that Joe talked about. Until we have that mindset change where someone in leadership who has the power to institute political change or legal change, we're not going to see it happen. And what we're hoping with all of this political and racial unrest is that maybe not all of it is 100% positive, but it's creating an awareness that our world needs. And maybe that will be the catalyst to the change that we desperately need in this world.
I think that makes sense. You know, one of the reasons why, so I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school for the first 6 years of my education, and then Baptist, you know, and you know, going through religion. And as I looked at religion, I kept thinking to myself, this can't be the way of God. It just cannot be, you know. So
it's not.
You know, women have to wear dresses, and you know, you got all of these pieces and parts. And I remember listening to a Klan speech a few years ago, and they justified the reason why they treat Black people the way it was with Ham. You know, supposedly he went into the tent of one of his daughters, or you know, and so he had the mark on his body, and so this means that Black people have been adjudicated to being descendants of Ham. So thus, Ham should have been destroyed, and everything that was associated with him should be destroyed. You know, and so there's something about the way we understand our world, and I think your points are very, very good. I just don't have any hope that anytime soon this is going to change. You know, I've heard the tipping point, but we have been here so many times before. You know, you go back to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, whoever you want to pick, and we've been here. We've had these discussions. And we seem to keep falling back on them. We keep falling back. We take one step forward and we take 2 steps backwards, and we go over and over and over again. And in the last, I don't even know, like say in the last 50 years, the racial intolerance to laws that were passed to say, yes, you know, you are equal, you can work, you can go to school, you can do all these things, have been so painful to even process that, you know, so thank God neither one of you from Texas, so you won't get mad at me when I say this, but there was a Black man by the name of James Byrd Jr. He was tied to the back of a pickup truck by some white people with a rope around his neck and drug for 3 miles until he was decapitated. And, you know, there's something about that. If you can make that in your mind visually, it has a visceral effect, right? You know, it's something about that. It's just so profound, you know, and, you know, when you kind of think about why is this person's life so expendable? A young woman wrote a poem about a penny for my thoughts, but not for my labor, in which she's described 244 years of slavery where people were working for the good of the plantation owner and did not receive anything about it. And then to further extrapolate that, we get Jim Crow, Reconstruction, and then whatever this is we have now. And you know, I certainly agree with what you said, Joe, because I mean, when I grew up in the rural South, you know, and so in my history book, I was taught that Christopher Columbus discovered the world. You know, he discovered America. You know, he was a guy. You know, he was him, and it kind of discounts Native Americans altogether, like they weren't here. You know, he showed up, and oh my goodness, there's the world. You know, and so I think that teaching and education is very important, but what are and who is doing the teaching, right? So if you are going to school and they're going to teach you that Christopher Columbus discovered America, you've gotten an education, but did you really get an education? You know, it's almost like that in religion as well. You got some pastors and preachers, you know who they are, who've sinned and, you know, cried on TV and said, you know, I've sinned against God and all these things. And there's something about it that runs to your mind. Like, if you really believed in God, if you really were holy, you would follow God's teaching. And if you read it, if you really read the Bible, and I've read every Bible I've written, whether it's the Quran or the Torah or whatever it is, there's one simple principle in there that exists in every single part of the Bible, and that is humanity, love, and kindness. You know, God speaks a lot about, you know, hell and for the people who sin and all that. And we all sin every day. We sin to some degree. And we're constantly in asking for forgiveness and to be, you know, uprighted. But we can justify our behaviors to others by saying, well, here's these passages that says this is why this is okay. You know, this is why this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go into the school system and you have these teachers who are teaching. And I mean, I don't even think it's, in many cases, the fault of the teacher, but, you know, there are guidelines the schools have, right? So my husband's a third grade teacher, you know, and so he can't wake up in the morning and say, I want to teach about African-American history. Here are the criteria that he has to teach it. He has to follow those guidelines strictly in order to maintain his career. Whereas in post-secondary education, faculty can say and do anything they want as long as they're tenured or on a tenured track, you know. So I really think it's going to be very important for people like two of you and others like you to think about this in a different kind of way and not just say, okay, well, you know, we know this is wrong, but to be advocates, to be out there on the streets, not necessarily protest, but be in your spaces, having conversations that are difficult and uncomfortable, and then going back home, you know, going to talk to your parents, talking to your kids, you know, about these conversations, because it cannot stop unless someone recognizes it as a problem. And do we? And I can say, I think unequivocally, we do not recognize this as a systemic problem, because, you know, monuments are just things, you know, they're just things, and you can document them in a book. You can put a book that Robert E. Lee and Grant and, you know, whomever, you can put that in a book. You can write, you know, as many as you want. Put it in the public domain. If people believe it, they buy it. If they don't, they don't. But to put statues up to constantly remind people how inferior they are and how great they are. So the old saying is, the South did not lose the war. They lost their relationship with the United States. You know, that was what their argument is that they did not lose the war. You know, although history book says that the North won or the Union won, but in reality, they don't believe that's so. You both seem pretty young to me, but there used to be a show called Beverly Hillbillies. Used to come on TV a long time ago.
We know it.
Yeah. And, you know, Granny would always get all flustered if somebody mentioned that the South lost. You know, she'd get, you know, all bent out of shape and, you know, want to shoot someone or something like that, you know, and her heroes were this. And, you know, as a Black person, I watched that show. I loved it. You know, it's one of my favorite shows because they were absolutely hilarious, you know. But it was reinforcing what we already knew people thought about the North and the South and why we fought. And I'll say one more thing and ask you a question about this. So I'm a student of Lincoln. I've read every book, almost every written by Abraham Lincoln. And it's unclear to me still to this day, and I probably read 100, 120 books, Was he pro-union, in other words, saving the states, or was he anti-slavery? And there's nothing in the literature that makes that resoundingly clear. No, my thought is that he wanted the states not to secede, right? He wanted us to stay as the United States, not that he particularly cared in a significant way about Black and brown people who were enslaved and mistreated. And so I want to ask both of you a question that is a more rhetorical question. What will you do this day and days forward with your children, your families, to educate all people, not just white people, but all people, to see each other as human beings?
I think that we've already started to do this. It's been very recent, as I mentioned, just the past 2 years. We've started with educating ourselves because we really were very ignorant of everything that's going on. And now that we're more educated than we were 2 years ago, admittedly still need more education, we are starting to talk about it more with our white friends and continuing to ask questions with our Black friends. I started my own blog about a month ago, and I've written a couple of posts about this topic in hopes that someday, if lots of people are reading the blog, that they will see a white person's perspective on how racism is not, it's not okay. It's just not. And how we hear from time to time from our Black friends how their parents had to teach them how to behave in society so they would not get arrested, sent to jail, beat up, picked on, etc. And I think that we need to start educating all children, not just Black children, on the equality of racism, on the equality of humans, and that racism is not something that will be tolerated. We personally don't have our own children. We do sometimes spend time with our kids' children, and we don't always have a voice in that we don't always have a voice when it comes to our own children. But we have nephews and nieces, we have cousins, I have a huge family in Canada, and I've been speaking out about it with them, and I know that Joe has also spoke out about it with his relatives through Facebook, I believe. And so I think that slowly we are trying to find where our voice is to help contribute to change, however small it may be.
Yeah, I think it's very important to speak out against, or to rebuke, if we were to use scripts, to rebuke the offender. And sometimes the offender is a white person just having in conversation. So one example would be if you're sitting around the dinner table with your family and one of my cousins makes a racist joke, I need to have that awkward moment where I say, hey, that's not okay. It's unacceptable. And, let's talk about this. Have those moments where you're willing to make things awkward or kind of rebuke somebody for showing signs of hatred towards somebody else because they're a different race or whatever the case is. So it's not just loving the people who have been offended, loving our African American friends or Chinese, Japanese, Middle Eastern, whatever the case is. It's not just loving them and trying to understand what they've been through and have a relationship. It's also speaking out against the people who are doing the crime or doing the hate. Because if we're not going to do that, then they're not going to change, right? You have to be, they're just going to keep doing it. And so, our Black neighbors might know that we love them and we care for them, but they're going to still get followed when they go to the store because they're Black, or they're still going to have, this is an example, but, a white woman with some Black kids, because she had interracial marriage, was at a store and another white lady came up, and this was up in New York, I think, but she started yelling at her saying, you're part of the problem, this interracial mixing. And this just happened a few weeks ago. Like it's, and if that lady, if nobody comes up to her and say, this is not allowed, this is not acceptable anymore, then what's going to change? So, and we've started doing that. It's hard. I'll be honest. It's especially with family. It's harder probably with family because like you've known them your whole life, but it's needed. And you get on Facebook and social media and people just post whatever's on their mind, and because they have total control, freedom to say whatever they want. And I think it's those opportunities where you have to write something, say, hey, you're kind of wrong here. Let's talk about it. And I think it's important to do that in a way that's respectful and loving, because if you attack somebody for their opinion, their viewpoint, they're just going to shut you out. So that's the other hard part, is if somebody says something or does something that makes you angry, how do you rebuke them, but in a way that's going to continue the conversation, let them know that you still respect them and love them, but hey, this is not acceptable. Otherwise, it's us versus them type of thing.
So let me ask you a question in line with what you just said. So let's just say we have this conversation about crayons. My favorite color is yellow and your favorite color is green, for argument's sake. And I've got my yellow crayon and I'm coloring everything in the world yellow. Everything is yellow. And that just is offensive to you. Like, okay, why isn't it green? What's the likelihood of either one of us coming to a place where we are on the same page about that the green and the yellow crayon can exist together?
Well, I like to be hopeful and optimistic and believe it can happen. But saying that, I also recognize if you use scripture, or you talk about God, there's sin in the world and it's always going to be there. But that doesn't give us, doesn't make it acceptable for us to then just say, okay, well, we can't change anything. So I think it can happen, but I think it's going to take, it's like, if you look at how many years that this has been going on, the racial injustice, it could take as many years, if not longer, to fight against it, to make that change to where we all are equal, which is in some ways kind of discouraging, because we're talking about decades and hundreds of years, right? And that can be discouraging, but it's one person at a time, and we had a African-American neighbor come over last night. He was on our lawn. We were on the front porch and we were talking, and we just started talking about racial issues. And he thanked us for asking questions. Like, it's, and not to pat ourselves on the back, but it's like one person at a time. If you put in the work and put in the effort, I think you can make a change.
And I think about your question of the yellow and green. We as a nation, as a world, as humans, need to come to a place where we're not constantly thinking of self, that we are able to understand, why do you like yellow? What is it about yellow that makes you so happy? And here's why I like green. And I think when you come to a place where you actually understand the other person's thoughts, experience, history, etc., then you can start to say, oh, I think the world would be beautiful if it was both green and yellow. But until you let go of self, which is not easy for humans to do, all humans, we're born selfish, that's not going to happen. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get the whole world to let go of self. We just have to hope and pray that we can get enough of the world to let go of self, that we can see the change that needs to be seen.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I find really fascinating about the world is the animal kingdom, specifically the wild animal kingdom. So you take a pride of lions or whatever the predator is. It doesn't try to kill everything that it sees. It just tries to survive. Kill enough food so I can eat and feed my family. And when you think about it, specifically coming back to scripture, God put everything here on the earth for man. So, you got lions, tigers, bears, and all those other kind of things. I love to tell my New York relatives that we have lions, tigers, and bears running around in North Carolina, so they don't ever want to come down here. But if you look at that example, and I would even go as far as to say trees and flowers, they're all trying to stand up in the glory of God. They're not trying to, like, if you look at the trees, they lean toward the sun, or, flowers, all of these things is to glorify something else. It's not like these things that are not as smart as we as humans are understand the importance of diversity, and not just color, but thoughts and ideas and ways to do things. Your analogy about the crayon was just beautiful. But like I like my yellow crayon, and I'm really stuck to my yellow crayon, and I just cannot let it go. I just don't understand why you think green is a good color. It's just awful. Whatever, never, never. And your point about how long this is going to take. Now, I've liked this yellow crayon my whole life, so I was probably born with a yellow crayon. When it came out the womb, it came out yellow crayon. And so now I'm 61 years old, and someone's going to come to me and tell me, well, I really think you ought to have a green crayon. Why? My yellow crayon has served me well for so long,
Yeah.
So when you think about it in ways that, your point is so valid. I don't think that we're going to see real change in our world until our great grandchildren, those, past Gen Z, whatever the next gens are, changes. Because hate is taught at home. And when
Right.
you're not parents, but I have two children. My children are not going to disobey or question me about something I say to them. So if I wake up in the morning, I said, white people are just terrible. You need to stay away from them. Okay. And they learn that lesson. It becomes embedded in who they are, and they believe that. Because I've told them that. This is what I've shared with them, and so I think that there is a lot of work to do. I believe some of it belongs to God, but I also believe, I used to have this, I'll tell you this little funny thing. I used to wish when I lived in South Carolina, every white person who had said or done something terrible when they died and went to wherever they went, that God was whatever it was they hated. So if you were a racist, God was black. If you were a sexist, God was a woman. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
kind of make you see how wrong you were. Because we don't
Mhm.
know what happens. But I used to always say that, I hope all white people who believe that blacks are inferior, when you die, that's the person who you get to see first. There's this black God or woman God or green God or yellow God or whatever it is that you found. People, the prejudice that we have moves so far and through our lives that it's kind of like so blonde hair and blue eyes is supposed to be better than dark hair and dark eyes. What the hell of a construct that is. And I'll tell you one
Mhm.
thing else, and I'll let you all go, but I used to work at UNC Chapel Hill. I was the director of IT for the School of Medicine. And so the state coroner's office was on top of our office. And he called me to his office one day, very nice old white gentleman. He called me to his office and he said, Rochelle, I want to show you something. And it had been a white person who had died and had been left in their house for like a month or something like that. And that person was the blackest thing I had ever seen. No hair, nothing. I mean, it's just nothing, but the body decaying. And he said, if we could understand this simple thing right here, that what's on the outside has nothing to do with what's on the inside. Because that was a white person who, who knows what kind of person it was. But if you would have walked up on that person, you would have seen it would have been a black person. And I
Right.
think that was just a phenomenal thing for me, because I realized that, if you look at people who've been burned or people who've been, scarred in wars and stuff like that, whatever we see on the outside has nothing to do with who the person is. It's just what you see on the outside. It's just what you see on the outside. So I thank you both so much for talking to me and sharing your thoughts, and please continue your work. Joe, I think you're going to have a harder time convincing your family that your green crayon is a good green crayon, because they've got hundreds of years of believing that green crayon was the right crayon. So it's going to take a while, but I do hope that the younger generation starts changing this. And I will tell you, my youngest child is 21 years old. He's a gamer, and all throughout the night, really late at night, because I go to bed pretty early and get up pretty early in the morning. I hear he and his teammates playing, and they're all colors. I mean, every kind of thing you could possibly imagine, and the way they speak to each other, you never find any animosity in what they, even when they lose or they don't win a game. And I what little I know about gaming now, it's a financial thing too. So if you get a good enough team together, you can make money. Doing this. And so my son is one of those kinds of people, and and his team is diverse. Their language is diverse. and they are never bothered by words that they say to each other or that they are different. They're bothered when they don't win the damn game. That's when you hear them. Oh, we didn't win, you know, how come you didn't shoot better, or why didn't you hit the ball better, or whatever it is. And so when you think about this, you know, like maybe Gen Z and those going down will get it. Maybe when old people like me die, you know, and people who are, you know, holding on to knowing so much pain, maybe that generation will get it and not allow this to continue, you know, and maybe that's God's will, you know, like we all learn somewhere in there. It says each generation is weaker and wiser. Maybe there's something about that that's really true. And so maybe, you know, they may not be as tough and as strong as we are in our convictions and the things that we do, but they may be smarter than we are. Hopefully that does bring about change.
Yeah.
So thank you both very much for talking to me. I really appreciate this. Is very, very helpful for me to hear your thoughts and your ideas. It's really good. And I celebrate your spiritual awakening and awareness. And, you know, it's a beautiful thing. But you got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we sure do.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you for doing what you do, Dr. Newton, to give us this opportunity to even to speak about this.
Oh, absolutely.
And to teach us. I mean, we were able to share our ideas, but some of the stuff you said is making us think even deeper. So it's just, you know, it's an ongoing process. And so thank you very much for doing that for us.
Oh, absolutely. And if you want to come back after you've gotten some more enlightenment and talk some more, just send me an email and we can do this again. So what happens when this ends, we'll take the video about a half hour or so to convert. I'll send you a link to it. And then you can say, yes, you can upload it, or no, don't upload it. And we can figure out what to do from there. But I am glad that there are people like you in the world who are at least trying to think about the humanity of the world as opposed to trying to think about yourselves. You know, we all want $1 million in the bank and want the best of everything, but the best world is a world when we all have access to everything, because there will be no crime. There's no reason to rob or kill or steal or whatever it is, because we all have access to the same thing. So thank you both very much, and continue your work. I'm very glad to meet you both, and tell Tanya I said good job. Thank you.
Will do.
We love Tanya and her husband Darren too. They're great friends of ours. So we'll tell her you said hello.
Yeah, please. I've known Tanya for maybe almost 30 years. So you know, her sons are lovely people. You know, she's just a very, very lovely woman, and I'm very grateful to call her my friend. You know, and we don't always agree on everything, but you know, I have to remind her that I am older, so you know, she has to. So
yeah, you're a little wiser than she is, right?
Exactly. So you know, there's that, but she really is a wonderful human being, and if she loves you, that's a love unlike. I can't even describe it. It's not like, you know, like husband and wife love or sister and brother love. It's a kind of love that's kind of covering. You know, I can go a whole year and not talk to Tanya, and the minute I hear her voice, we're right back where we were. And very, very blessed to have her in my life. And, you know, I pray for her constantly, you know, because her health has not always been so great, you know, and thankfully she's turning a corner. And, you know, I keep praying, you know, because I think the world would be a terrible place without a Tanya Marsh. You know,
I agree.
Tanya Dawson, but Tanya.
Yes.
The world would be a very, very different place without her.
Yeah.
Totally agree. She's been through a lot, and she has a lot of wisdom because of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you both very much. I'll send you the link, Tracy, and you can let me know, you know, but it'll take about a half hour or so to convert. And when I do, I'll upload the link to you, and you can look at the video and see what we've done and see if it's okay with you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rochelle.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
You too.
You too.
Do the same. Bye-bye.
Bye.